So here is part 2 of the Essendon Bombers doping scandal. Now I want to find out what happened after.
If you haven't seen part 1 to this video, you can click the link in the description or on the card on the top right of the video.
I'll leave it in the end credits for you guys if you want to know my reaction to the first bit.
So, whilst the SADA had released their findings, legally they had merely accused the players of using illegal substances and had not returned a guilty verdict, although everyone anticipated that they eventually would. The players were to front the AFL tribunal to have their guilt determined, and amazingly, on the 31st of March 2015, the tribunal announced that it had found the 34 players not guilty, almost another year on from SADA's report. SADA had not been able to prove to comfortable satisfaction that it was thymosin beta-4 that the players had been given.
I suppose on that side of things, it makes sense because if you can't be 100% sure someone is guilty of something, then you can't say they're guilty. You have to be 100% certain to say someone's guilty. It's the same way it works in sports. So, for example, in my refereeing, when I referee football, if I'm not 100% sure the ball goes across the line, but I think it does, well, I can't give it because I'm not 100%. So it does make sense.
The suspensions were lifted and the players were permitted to play during the 2015 season. Relief for all Essendon fans who had already endured more than they could handle. Whilst the SADA conceded the verdict, its parent authority WADA, standing for the World Anti-Doping Agency, announced that they would appeal the decision to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. English, Belgian and Australian barristers headed a panel in mid-November of 2015 and in January of 2016 handed down a guilty verdict.
A guilty verdict. So from March 2015, they were let off, right? They were found not guilty. And then January 2016, they then get found guilty by the higher up organisation. Wow. Now, I think the whole thing boils down to, in this situation of the players, is did they know what they were taking? That's the important thing, isn't it? Did they know what they were taking? And I think only they will know, won't they? Only them and maybe the doctor guy, I can't remember his name now, only they will know if they knew what the substance was. It's a very tricky one, isn't it? But that time, from March to January, you think you're in the clear, and then you get done again.
Overthrowing the AFL Tribunal's decision. So why were the two different decisions reached? Basically, the AFL used a chain link style of evidence, where if one link of evidence was not present, they elected that a causal link could not be drawn, and therefore the players would be found not guilty. The Court of Arbitration for Sport used a method called strands in a cable, which allows for individual links of evidence to be missing if the combination of all the other chains still presents a compelling case. One final appeal was lodged and denied, and the Essendon supplement saga, at least from a legal sense, had finally drawn to a close.
That's interesting on the two different methods. And I think both make sense, don't they? Both make complete sense. It's like, I don't know, a crime scene, there's a murder, and in the SADA incident, there's only two people in a room. One's being killed, and the murderer's there. There's no other people found. However, the gun isn't there, or the weapon isn't there, so he's found not guilty. Whereas the WADA, you could say, well, okay, well, there's only two people in that room. No one else was able to get in. You can't find the weapon. However, there is clear evidence or reasoning that the one person killed him, even though that one piece of evidence wasn't there. I think that makes sense. It makes sense, I assume. I think my analogy's quite good there. All right, anyway, let's continue. What was the after effects of this?
All this legal discussion is pretty boring and likely confusing. But what did all these various legal bodies looking into Essendon actually find? Well, a paper trail was followed to discover that Dank had been dispensed thymosin beta-4, the banned substance, by Como Compounding Pharmacy in South Yarra. But it couldn't be proven that it was this exact form of thymosin that was injected into the players, and that's why the AFL returned a not guilty
What other
verdict.
form could it be?
WADA, however, used Stephen Dank's text messages against him, citing text he had had with members of the club administration that thymosin was what was going to assist the Bombers' soft tissue recovery. WADA concluded that thymosin beta-4 was the only type of thymosin that had those effects, and therefore built the case that Dank must have used that strand to inject the players. Some other horrifying texts from Dank revealed requests for other drugs to assist with injuries, asking the pharmacy contact whether it had been tried on anyone, to which the pharmacist responds with, "A few dental injections, not sport." Dank responds with, "Let's test a couple players." Seemingly...
Oh man, that seems so reckless. That is dreadful. I think that is actually the worst bit of this that I've now heard. It's only been tested on a few dental patients. Let's try it on a few players. Like, he doesn't care about their well-being, really, does he? He doesn't care. It's almost like they're an experiment for him. That's what it's now coming across as. This Dank guy is an absolute mental head case, and I don't know what the situation is now. I don't know where he is, where any of the players are. But this dude should be locked up, because it's like lab rats, isn't it? That's what he's sort of using the players for.
Stephen Dank was using the Bombers as guinea pigs for his experiments like some movie villain. But the players weren't at fault either. Under Dank's instruction, the players had not declared their injections anywhere on their doping control forms, meaning that they had purposely hid the fact that they were having injections from the AFL. So, what's the conclusion? Well, all evidence appears to point to the idea that the Essendon players and most of the staff, including James Hird, truthfully did not know what was in the injections given to them. Despite this, the findings suggest misconduct on the part of everyone at the club except Dr. Bruce Reid. The coaching and playing group were complicit in the cover-up of the supplements, even if they didn't know what was in them. It appeared to be one man's doing in bringing in this culture of cheating to a traditional and hard-working club. The lack of critical thinking and willingness to accept this stranger's shifty assistance is damning.
That's the crime of the players, I think, isn't it? So they knew they were taking a substance, and I think that's probably correct in what the guy said, that probably the players especially didn't know what was going in their bodies. And actually, you could almost think of some old psychology experiments where you just trust the people. You know, it's all well and good saying, look, I could easily say, well, why didn't they ask what was in the substance? Why did they not ask what was being put in their arms? But actually, if you're there in that situation, maybe you wouldn't, because you trust the doctor who's meant to be trained and responsible for your health and well-being in a sense. So I can understand, like, mentality. I can actually understand why they wouldn't have asked and been, questioning what is going in there. So I can. However, but their fault, the players' fault is they didn't announce that anything was going in their bodies in the first place. They must have thought surely they would realise something was dodgy, but I repeat my last statement.
And something everyone involved at the club in 2012 will forever regret. As for Dank, he was rightly banned from involvement with the AFL for life, and effectively from any major sport in the country. Dank may have known that his activities at Cronulla would be found out, and used the time he had while that case was in court to wreak havoc with peptide testing at another club. Or that may just genuinely be how he operates. Justice was not quite as sound for the man who brought Dank to the club, Dean Robinson. Robinson seemingly was very involved in the saga, and despite being sacked by the club in early 2013 before the investigation, Robinson won a $1 million settlement against Essendon on the grounds of unfair dismissal. In a now infamous tell-all interview...
Please tell me Essendon got that money back. How is it unfair dismissal?
With Seven, Robinson claims he was privy to none of the illegality of what was being given to the players.
It was open. No one was hiding anything, because we didn't think we were doing anything wrong.
Robinson blames the entire program on the club, and particularly James Hird and sports administrator Danny Corcoran.
Might be right.
The financial hardship was not over for the Bombers. Not only did WorkSafe fine the Bombers $200,000 for poor workplace conduct, but they also had to settle a number of compensation deals on the grounds of loss of earnings and mental anguish. The Bombers operated at a $9.8 million loss for that year, but possibly the saddest consequence of the entire saga was Jobe Watson, captain of the club, who voluntarily handed his Brownlow medal back to the AFL, conceding that it was not rightfully his. Speaking subjectively, however, Jobe Watson did deserve that medal for his play in the 2012 season. Easily the best and fairest player that season despite a possible chemical advantage. Watson was particularly gutted, but did the right thing, presuming his medal would inevitably be stripped anyway.
I think that's fair from Joby, actually. I think that's spot on in what he did. It goes back to, obviously, how much the players knew about what was going in their own bodies. But he definitely did the right thing, didn't he? Handing his medal back. Even if he was the best player, how much of that was due to chemical assistance, should we say? So fair play to him at least for doing that. It's a tricky one because actually, potentially players do need loss of earnings. What I find interesting is that figure of, was it 8.5 million, 9.5 million that they just said. It's amazing how in top level Aussie rules, that is a hell of a lot of money. That is so much money. And I'm just thinking compared to football, as in soccer, my football, Premier League, that's nothing. That's absolutely nothing. You know, you can't even buy good players for that sort of money anymore. It's. I'm not downplaying either sport. I'm just comparing how much money is in certain sports at the moment.
All in all, the Essendon supplement saga appeared to be the doing of one man with a few helpers, and the oblivious complacency of an entire club whose operations and methods would be promptly shaken up following the controversy. The general love for the playing group was not lost by fans, with membership sales actually trending positively. The consensus was that, although complicit, the players and coaching staff didn't really know what was truly in the injections, and the general AFL public were largely sympathetic to the playing group following their suspension. To the Bombers' credit, they recovered from this insane saga exceptionally well for some more finals appearances in 2017 and 2019.
Don't show Swans.
This is partly due to the loyalty shown by the players that were still at the club. Even after such an ordeal, 10 of the 12 players still listed at Essendon re-signed for season 2017. See, because Essendon breached the players' contracts by conducting the injections, the Bombers were free to walk to any other clubs as free agents because their contracts were essentially void. The fact that only 2 active players chose to exercise that option is proof that despite all, the culture at Essendon was still undeniably strong.
That is mad. That's mad to think that these players were allowed to go. They were allowed to go as free agents, and 10 out of 12 stuck by the club. And that almost makes me think, now I don't know, but it almost makes me think about the loyalty that you get from players and clubs. That clubs mean a lot to players. Which I'm going to compare again if you don't mind. But you don't get that in football. Players will go for money. You know, they could be brought up, for example, Southampton. You could be brought up as a Southampton fan, go up in the Southampton Academy, play in the Southampton first team. As soon as the grass looks greener somewhere else, players are gone. There's no real loyalty. It's very few at the moment. Very, very few. James Ward-Prowse seems loyal at the moment. So that's incredible to think of the difference here that 10 of the 12 players stayed. I think that's impressive stuff if you're an Essendon fan and showing the family community feel and the loyalty that players had to the club.
Whilst a number of those players were nearing the end of their careers, there were quite a few who still had the prospect of impacting the side for years to come, some of whom are still mainstays in the current Essendon lineup. Heppel, Bell-Chambers, Hooker, Hurley. Being forcefully bad in 2016 also allowed for a healthy trip to the draft, picking up Andrew McGrath and Jordan Ridley. But in a sense, the 2016 season for the Bombers, despite just tallying 3 wins, allowed for the rapid acceleration of realised potential in the Bombers' younger group, based on the fact that their young players were thrust into leadership roles and forced to contend with the game's best with little to no senior core. For some players, that's a realisation they aren't ready for, and they fall into obscurity. But for a lot of the new generation baby Bombers, it was nothing but beneficial.
What a fantastic point. Fantastic point. Now, clubs in all sports have academies full of young players that, yes, a lot won't make it. But yes, some will. And they need that first team experience, that senior experience to actually improve and go up a level. And we see this over, and I think this is brilliant that actually Essendon were forced to do it. They were forced to it. They probably wouldn't have if they weren't forced to, but they were. And I find it very I'm so sorry, but I am really comparing to football in this video. So if you're not interested, I do apologise. But what I find interesting is actually during COVID, the Premier League teams, players got COVID. And some teams had a lot of players that got COVID. And instead of playing their youngsters, which they had plenty of, they postponed games. They asked the Premier League to postpone games. But they had all these players in the academies, under 23s, under 19s, under 18s, sorry, whatever. And they didn't use them. Why were they postponing games when they could have thrusted these youngsters into senior positions and see if they are the next big thing? Give them that experience. And they didn't. They didn't. So potentially, this showing that actually giving the youth a chance at senior level will allow players to prosper.
Zach Merritt, Joe Danaher, Anthony McDonald, Tip and Woody off the rookie list, whoever that is,
Tip and Woody.
Darcy Parish, all possibly wouldn't be the players they were if the rest of the Bombers playing group was still playing. Another element of the Bombers' recovery that worked nicely for them was that despite paying out many of their banned players, their above-board salary cap was quite benefited by the loss of several players. Signing and trading Dylan Shield, Jake Stringer, Devon Smith, Adam Sard and Jacob Townsend, among others, were critical lineup measures that balanced and created a competitive, fast-moving, slick outfit. Although they haven't yet capitalised on their refreshed lineup, their list is strong considering all the adversity they faced over the infamous supplement saga. Best assessments suggest that Essendon's list in 2012 was over the hill as far as genuine contention is concerned in a competitive era of footy. Not to say that the injection regime was good for the club because financially they are still yet to recover, but certainly a rejuvenation in the Bombers' list as a result of some opportunities the club couldn't have gotten otherwise means that the club as a whole is in good stead.
I wouldn't look at the current league table for this season, 8 games into the 2022 season, because Essendon are not in a good position. They're not in a good position, down third from bottom.
And if anything, the cultural review and lessons learned from the darkest patch in Essendon's history could set them up well for years to come. The competition has largely treated the affair as a flash in the pan, and almost a decade on, it seems that the AFL world has forgiven the Bombers for the affair. Despite this, the portions of the game's history that are often most interesting to look at are also the most infamous. And a look into the Bombers supplement saga demonstrates how volatile the reputation of sport is, and how easy it is to tarnish a club's standing, and a testament to the fortitude of that club and a playing group to come out of the other side. But it was, and always will remain to be, the scandal that broke the AFL.
I find it interesting how long it took. So bearing in mind, it happened in 2012. 2015, Asada said not guilty for the players. 2016, January 2016, it went to WADA and they found them guilty. So straight away, that's a 3+ year time zone. And then you obviously have players not playing. And so it seems a very long period of time that it took to really finalise everything, I suppose. It's an interesting one. And as I said, I had comments on the previous one. Oh, I just look at the negative stuff on AFL. But I look at the negative stuff of everything, because you've got to use these things to learn, to make sure things don't happen again, and just to learn from mistakes. And actually, these infamous situations are interesting. They're interesting to learn about. Now, as I said, Essendon aren't doing very well this season, and they've got some good players. Old Tip and Woody hasn't been playing much because I think he's been injured or recovering, and he's been in the academy side. So they haven't necessarily got their potential. But as I said, this does show. I think this shows a lot of psychology actually, in how players will take something and they don't actually know what it is just because a higher up or someone that is meant to be responsible for them tells them it's okay. I think that's the fascinating thing about it actually. Human psychology. It's an interesting one. Anyway, Thank you so much for watching. Very kind of you if you stuck all the way through. Tell me your memories of this situation. Are you an Essendon fan, and what are your thoughts on this? Are you over it? Do you forgive everyone? You know, is everyone forgiven and time moves on? Anyway, let me know. Thank you so much, and I will catch you next time.